The unfortunate realities has been and are the fact that the Moors of the Western Hemisphere have been under hybrid colonial European occupation for a couple centuries and have had misconceptions about ourselves, misconceptions about politics, misconceptions about economies, misconceptions about education, misconceptions about anthropology, misconceptions about etymology, misconceptions about epistemology, misconceptions about metrology, and misconceptions about astrology and cosmology, all of which are part of Moorish culture, Moorish science, the culture of all Africans on planet Midgard Earth. And you will hear people make mention very often about Moorish science without an explanation. Often they are, when pressed to hold a position, they will usually start talking about a religious perspective or some worshipful perspective relative to Moorish science, as opposed to earth culture, which is really what Moorish science is. So when you're talking Moorish science, you're still talking about ancient Chaldea, Hittite, Moabite, Canaanite, etc., Phoenician, all of your ancient peoples of Asia and Africa, etc., from the north to the south of Asia and to ancient Almarak or ancient America. And you look at a conjoined and relative culture and a relative cosmological natured system of governing, etc., and the fundamental knowledge of the constitution of Earth in relationship to the constitution of man, etc., and thus the constitutional principles upon which we govern ourselves. Now, I know that very often when people talk about constitutions, their mind often, because of training, runs only to what has been presented in more recent days, coming from the Moorish Confederation of Anansi, sometimes referred to as the Iroquois Confederation, and the adaptation of Moorish law by the hybrid Europeans who've been occupying North America, which evolved into what is known as the Constitution for the United States Republic, coming out of trade routes and trade treaties with the people of the land who are of Canaanite Moabite descent, collectively known as Moors, and the Moorish Empire, which is why you hear scholars who go into Western world politics and history, particularly in relationship to the judicial operations of authorities and powers that are used in judicial structures, etc., they'll go to constitutional principles, but yet not tell the people that you're actually going to Moorish law or fatwa, although it's known. However, due to the fact that we collectively, being the people of the land, have been under hybrid European occupation for a couple of centuries, etc., many of the people have lost cognizance of also the earth culture on Earth in relationship to human interchange with each other, within national forums and within international judicial forums. One of the fundamental rules that must be remembered and restored with us as a people is to remember that free will is cognate and primal to all of our agreements, communications, and instruments of contract that refer to or establish any what you would call judicial principles of law and execution of such laws, etc., for the organized government and the harmonies of man. The unfortunate situation that you'll see taking place today particularly with many of the people of the land, is that they have forgotten that the hybrid Europeans who have been occupying North America and claiming to be Americans have been misrepresenting themselves as the legitimate American peoples of the land and possessing such sovereign powers that go with the pedigree of the American people, and the people have forgotten that they're colonists, and so therefore there's a misconception of the legitimacy of the actors and operators who have been occupying our land and pretending to be government for quite some time. And it's an interesting dynamics whereas you have to constantly remind the people of making the distinction between the principle of that which is de jure and that which is de facto. And very often that is forgotten. Now, the judicial notices that have been used for the last 30, 35 years by Moors, etc., is simply a notice given to persons of hybrid European descent who have literally, in organized fashion, which most of you who know contemporary politics know that they are de facto order or body of criminals and human traffickers who have been pretending to be legitimate government since the Abraham Lincoln administration, on the purpose and cause of avoiding their duties and responsibilities and obligations to all treaties in force from which that Constitution for the United States is derivative in purpose and in cause. Now, when you're looking at the judicial notice, you'll notice that we have inserted within that judicial notice 12 case laws dealing, and they're all under stare decisis. So keep this in mind, because we don't want to, this is not a subject matter on stare decisis and res judicata. But we want you to write this down so that you can go back and reference, because also I want you to be reminded that because of the fast changing politics on Midgard at this time, and the fact that nations of the earth have stopped buying U.S. corporation treasury bonds, they have upped their ante of COINTELPRO operations and trolling to try to dissuade people from dealing with treaty and constitutional principles to which they are obligated, and also mocking judicial principles, etc., as if they are contrary to truth and contrary to law. So stare decisis is essentially established law that is not contradicted or cannot be contradicted in any inferior court, because it's based on established law and established judicial principles, etc. So stare decisis is a principle of established law that applies in any particular case or any particular subject matter or subject jurisdiction or and judicial issue or ruling that cannot be contradicted by any other court under the jurisdiction of the United States Corporation Company operatives or any of your inferior courts. And so there is no need to for such litigations to take place, because it is established, as opposed to, as an example, where something has what you would call a questionable aspect to it, where it may need aggregate determinations and litigation, and whereas that might be necessary. So stare decisis is where there is no argument, there is no issue, any like cases or any substantive issues related to such subject matter in a stare decisis decision is already established as law, and as a matter of fact, not even supposed to be discussed, meaning that it is done. It is the law, etc. And res judicata represents the same principle, where these things are put to rest as they are established. So on the judicial notice, you'll notice that there are 13 different stare decisis cases. And I think a lot of times people miss that concept, particularly people who are beginning to become conscious and are using the proclamations and the judicial notice, having limited what's called judicial background studies. And that's because things are moving so fast. Years ago, we had decided to make the proclamations and the judicial notice available to the people at large because of counteractions that have been taken by some of the members of the Roman Curia and the secret societies operating under the United States jurisdiction, including persons who are beneficiary members of many of the municipalities operating on the land under so-called states jurisdictions, not republic states jurisdictions, nor commonwealth state jurisdiction, but under states of jurisdiction, which is actually a foreign jurisdiction, contrary to the republic, contrary to treaty, contrary to constitution. And so, but in the rule of contract and consent in what's called trade and in international law, one of the things that the hybrid colonists have done to our people to enforce birthright theft and on another level, soul theft. That's another subject matter within itself because they're also soul thieves. And then you're going more into more of the metaphysical of also why they're doing what they're doing. And this goes into your higher level of the dark priesthood operatives that are part of these operations of the United States Corporation Company and their human trafficking operations, including their practices of child sacrifice, bloodletting, and a whole bunch of things which are not the direct subject matter at the moment, but are indeed related. So essentially, your proclamations are sent out to those FOFers, and understand FOFer is who the general operators of the United States Corporation Company actually are. FOFer is the feudal designation for persons who hold themselves as trustees over other people's estates, etc. So you would look at FOFer as being, relative to what would be a trustee, except a FOFer is more feudal as opposed to anything allodial, etc. And is usually a position taken by what you would call a belligerent trustee, or someone who takes a position of trustee with the intention of defrauding, stealing, misrepresenting, creating artificial methods by which estates of others can be transferred to their own cause or own reason or own benefit without letting the natural person or people who are designated as the true beneficiaries of an estate, etc., or an inheritance, without letting them being made aware that they're actually being robbed. So this is the practices that most of you who know jurisprudence has been taking place over the last century or so with what is known as the 14th Amendment operations of the straw man, which some of you know as, and the nom de guerres, which many of you know, and the straw man operations of branding systems. And also, whereas the hybrid Europeans operating at North America on the land in a de facto posture have practiced in order to steal the lands and the estates of the people of the land and converting them under the guise of law or under a color of law, color of authority, and a color of operations to their own means, etc., and to their own service, upon which they have built the massive wealth that has been known in modern times at North America in the possession of hybrid Europeans who have designated themselves as white people, particularly since the Knights of Columbus Ku Klux Klan oath of 1854 to 1863, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Chicago, Illinois, and much related to the Whiggamore Party, of which most of you know Horace Greeley has had much influence on, with, etc. And also for those of you who have been keeping up with a lot of the counter actions that have been going on among the hybrid Europeans through their de facto political parties that have been operating on the land, known as the Republican Party and known as the Democratic Party, which are both branches of the Whiggamore parties from 1854, etc., dealing with more of the operations of the what is known as the conscience Whigs and the cotton Whigs, which is actually what's going on. So when you're talking about conscience Whigs, you're talking about people who play the coinage or take the flip coin, known as the Republican Party, and the cotton Whigs, known as the Democratic Party, which is also known as the Kyklos Party or Ku Klux Klan, etc. And then also being aware that many of our people are not aware of the truth of the politics that have been operating. The judicial notices were put in place to interrupt the assumed practice of consent by the people to be 14th Amendment persons, which is really stock for the United States Corporation Company operators and owners, and has nothing whatsoever to do with any legitimate citizenship process, etc., under naturalization. And also it must be understood that the people of the land, i.e. Moors, cannot or cannot be U.S. corporation citizens. And that has been a contention of information and a conflict of concept among the people for decades. And because people are becoming more and more conscious of the truth of the politics operating on the land and what's been going on in the world, that has become more and more controversial as of late. And then, of course, because people are exercising their five senses and starting to figure out some of this corruption and have been nationalizing, etc., recognizing that the United States that has been presented to them was indeed not a country and indeed is not the country on this land, but actually a private corporation owned by secret societies under the Roman Curia operations of the Unum Sanctum operations via the Pope of Rome, Queen of England, and the Circle Church and the Chancery in England, etc., and then transferred jurisdictional operations and running the judicial platforms at North America through the British accredited registry, which you know as the Bar Association. And because they have created bonds that they have been selling to other nations, particularly since 1861, and really accelerated in 1862. This is the reason why many of you who start doing research will find a lot of what you call missing text in the congressional records relative to 1862. Of course, the people are not aware that the members of the Roman Curia who have infiltrated what you know as the Congress and the Senate for the United States and actually had been secretly overthrowing the republic, which is really what you're dealing with today politically and economically. We're not aware that these people are actually agents of the bar and that are indeed de facto. And therefore, there's some expectations that the people have had from expecting these people to act a certain way in relationship to Constitution and treaty law, and then constantly running to what you call this brick wall of these people not only not acknowledging constitutional principle, but actually openly countering it and openly mocking and criticizing anyone who enforced treaty or constitution, because that is indeed and was not indeed their agenda. Many of the people never complained or countered or protested and or made any declaratory statements to the contrary because they thought that these people were legitimate. However, with the politics that you see taking place on the planet now, the nations of the earth are starting to reject them, and of course, that's bringing more attention to the criminal operations of the de facto Congress and Senate operating on the land, who are actually organized criminals. And while that has been known, absolutely known, the people have become fearful of them because they have actually sent out what you will call the local military operations to actually murder people on the street. Those contract murderers are known as the Fraternal Order of the Police. It's unfortunate, but it's absolutely the truth. And so whenever you had anyone who would talk about or even deal with enforcement of international law principles and proper contract issues dealing with free will, substance for substance, as an example, that a contract, valid contract cannot be vague, that all persons involved or people involved in contract, they cannot produce something that's vague to another. You cannot impose de facto or vague contracts on minors, or minors cannot make contract, etc. And so they have set up a political platform, a de facto political platform, to accommodate the institutionalized fraud, and that has been known essentially as the Democratic Party. That does not mean, and that is not to say, that the Republican Party operating on the land is separate from them, because they absolutely are not. That is put in place to present the pretext of actually being separate, or that there are separations of powers operating in the name of government on the land. And actually, there are two sides of the same coin, and are controlled by the same entity operations of the accredited, the British accredited registry from Fleet Street, England. And most of that you all already know. But the point of it is that I want to present to you is in relationship to the judicial notice. What you're doing when you present the judicial notice to the major corporate operatives, say, as an example, the Inquisition Revenue Service, known to the most people who don't know the real politics. They call it the IRS, or the Internal Revenue Services. Those who know what it actually is, it's Inquisition Revenue Services operating for the de facto Congress and senators, so that they could rob the people incrementally, in harmony and in support, and authorized by the doctrine of discovery, which was initiated by the popes of Rome under the Spanish Inquisition, particularly in the Western Hemisphere, against the Aboriginal indigenous people of the land, etc., in order to, over periods of time, to drain and steal the estates, which is exactly what has happened. And you need to know that that's the basis of the poverty and the economic stresses that the people are feeling today. But they need to know that. However, Conscious Moors, knowing that, put out a judicial notice to put them on notice. The issue is, a notice is not a request. You're not requesting them to acknowledge constitutional principles or the customs and traditions of the people of the land of your forefathers from which that constitution is drafted, i.e. honor, honesty, confederation, etc. You're actually notifying them so that they can no longer openly and covertly sell instruments on the stock market or around the world, saying that you voted or consented to their creating bonds against yourself via the 14th Amendment operations of bonding, which is the foundation of the Treasury bonds, which has been operating for these decades, past decades, and have been actually at the foundation of their economic access to the World Global Trust, and upon which the economic system for trade, international trade, has been built. And what you recognize is that many of the people have not been aware that those treasury bonds that have been used to support the corporate operations of the United States Corporation Company was actually based on their own estates. And we've been over this like redundantly for decades. But I'm just bringing this up on another point because of what you find is many people send the documents out to the 7 different jurisdictions that are mentioned often on different websites and different venues that we have dealt with over the years, and expect a response coming back from the de facto operators, or on another level, expecting them to put your documentation in their files, acknowledging your right and their obligation to treaty and constitution, and then finding many people being, I say, or alarmed or disappointed or questioning. Well, they didn't answer. I sent my papers out and they didn't acknowledge or they didn't send a response back, etc. The point that I'm making to you is that you're not to expect a response. You're putting them on notice what you're doing by fact of law, contract law, and in fact of law of assumed judicial or what you call power of attorney. What you've done is fired them, even though you didn't need to fire them because they were never legitimate in the first place. But what you do, you create a paper trail by which you're making it known, publicly known by proclamation, that you are restoring or reclaiming your right of estate to yourself and to all your hereditaments, and that they cannot loosely or under any guise of authority, which they have already been doing and practicing, so-called represent you and your estate under the guise of being de jure government, which they are not, and continue their fraud, their human trafficking, and their child sacrifice practices that they've been doing, and then it be assumed by the rest of the world that you are sanctioning them. So you're not looking for a response from them. What you're doing is firing them. And that's actually in the nature more of a plebiscite and not so much a vote. So don't expect what you call a harmonic and agreeable response for them, because what you also presenting to them, and this is another thing that why we talk about stare decisis. You notice how hostile you'll see some of them become, including a lot of the trolls that they've been paying to troll us or to try to misrepresent what we've been telling the people over these years, and trying to make it look like we're making these things up, etc., when actually those things are stare decisis. But what it is actually doing also, it's causing them to expose themselves to you, proving that they are anti-constitutional, that they are anti-humane, that they are actually organized criminals. Now, you can tell the people that these people are criminals, and they, without a background in jurisprudence, may have questions or may look at it from the perspective of what is that your or my or someone's opinion one way or another. And in fact, that's not the case. The issue is that they're proving to you that they're de facto. And so this is another reason you're putting the judicial notice out. So understand, a notice is not a request. You're not asking them for anything. Why? Because number one, rights are not given. Rights are claimed. Governments were never structured to give rights. They don't have that authority. They do not have that delegated authority. It is not within the structure of government to give rights. They don't have rights to give. Governments are in place to secure rights pre-existing, i.e., what is commonly known also as unalienable rights. So it means there can be no lien on it. That means anything relative to unalienable rights, such as rights of travel or liberties, etc., are divine in their nature, or what some people would refer to as God-given, which is a term implying divine order, having nothing to do with government whatsoever. And that is what unalienable rights relate to. It's also what birthright relates to. And so what you find is these breaches have been made all across the board in relationship to the people's rights, the people's liberties, the people's hereditaments, etc. And they have been falsely hiding their criminality behind the terms racism and prejudice, and the people have been arguing racism and prejudice rather than birthright theft, soul theft, hereditament theft, etc., which indicates that they were not necessarily sharp on the issue of jurisprudence. So as a point of fact, that's one of the things I wanted to bring to your attention in relationship to the judicial notice, etc. In other words, you're telling them, you're not my trustee, nor are you my FOFR, that I am retaining all rights and all self-authority, etc., even though we are aware that you're hostile and that you're alien and that you're pretending to be government, knowing that you're not, and also upset because we figured it out that you are. This is where you have a lot of your operatives acting on behalf of the Circle Church and the Chancery, who have been making videos as of late criticizing, which all criticism is good if it's positive, but you'll see them misrepresenting what we have been presenting and attacking the judicial notice. But that's proof that they are anti-constitutional, because those judicial notice principles of constitutional law are stare decisis. It is the law of the land. And you can see why they are being so destructive in the name of helping the people, because the real deal is that they're upset that the people are waking up, because what it does, in fact, it interrupts with the smooth transfer of the bonding system, and this has affected their economic base, etc., and the stock market, as the people have not been aware that the stock is actually them. And this is also why members of the Roman Curia, through their Federal Reserve operations, have been propping up the stock market, because the nations will no longer want to trade with them, although the nations of the earth are burdened with the artificially constructed position of the Jesuit Federal Reserve note of private commercial paper, commonly known as fiat, being forced by force and by war and by covert operations, being what is known on the World Trade Platform as reserve currency. And the fact of the matter is that it has collapsed now. And so a lot of things that you see going on now is to cover up that fact. However, understanding that they also know that our people have been behind the times relative to fundamental civics, not just civics as a rule or discipline, but from fundamental civics. And by them keeping our people or miseducating our people through the John D. Rockefeller and Frederick T. Gates, notice that name, Gates, Federation operations of Inquisition Unum Sanctum, which you know as the General Education Board, which was set up in 1902, etc., with the missionary work of dumbing the people down. We need not go into that because you already know that. But that's for people who don't know, who may be listening, so you can do some research on your own, so you can understand why your children are in trouble, and understand why you've been in trouble, and understand why they can't read contracts, understand why and how they've been doing what you call dead pledges, mortgages, and gentrifying your communities. It's not about the complexion of your skin. It's that you don't know contract law and you have not been enforcing Constitution and treaty because you didn't know that's what the foundation of these problems are, etc. So the judicial notice kills their alleged authority in relationship to others, because remember, when they're doing business with other nations, whether they've been using, as they have used in the past, the marriage certificates, and in more recent years, the birth certificates to build their bonds on, the nations of the earth are not buying them anymore. So you need to understand the root of the political and economic confusion that's happening, taking place right now. And the other deal, they've been accelerating their theft of the people's estates, and they hide it behind the word inflation. Write that down and look it up later. We won't get into that. That's what inflation is. And they're accelerating it even more now, since you have people around the world, not just here at North America, who have been looking into the fundamental principles that we have been presenting for the last 35, 40 years, and are starting to take responsibility for their lives to the limit that they're able to. And of course, that's messing up the system. And so what they want the people to do, or how they want the people to respond, is to feel guilty for exercising rights, to treat anyone who speaks of constitutions, treaties, etc., to treat them as if they're violating the law, as opposed to people paying attention to the fact that these are actually organized criminals who have overthrown the Constitution for the United States in order to violate their obligations to the treaties that supersede that Constitution, and of course their obligations to the people. And instead of accepting the fact, which is taking place, that they're being exposed for the criminals that they are, the human traffickers that they are, the child sacrificing operations that they have operated, and the fact that they have actually been stealing people's estates, it can't be hidden anymore, because what's happening, these are the things that you're going to be looking for. Those of you who have investments in what you call 401k plans, pension plans, so-called medical retirement plans of any type whatsoever, they don't want you to recognize that they have robbed them all. And these are the people who you think are government. We're not talking about, see what they've done. This is what they've done. They have deceived the people into thinking that when they see, as an example, members of the gangs of New York systematically murder innocent women and men on the streets and accost them, and then charge them, who they attack, with battery and things like that, they don't want you to know that it is they who sent them out there to target the people. They want you to think that these people are operating outside, pardon me, authorization of themselves, when actually they send them out there. As an example, where you see members of the gangs of New York have been systematically, and they've upped the ante, particularly in the last few years, where they do what you call unum sanctum sacrifices on the street. This is where they'll snatch people out of cars and stuff like that and kill them or try to smother them. It's kind of spoiled a little bit because people are starting to use cameras and take pictures of them. And the fact that they have cameras on their phones now, you'll see it taking place. You'll see it exposed more often, even though it happens more than what you see. But those purposes of those military operations serve the purpose of intimidating the people. But the point that it also is showing you is that these people are not your government. They are your enemies, attacking the people of the land, the peaceful inhabitants of the land, and then calling the people criminal for even having any semblance of trying to exercise a right. So back to the point. The proclamations and judicial notice are to put the hybrid Europeans who have been faking as Americans for years, that they are not to claim in any instrumentality of having power of attorney over yourself or over your estate, etc. And this is also why you see the entrance or the preliminary preface statement on the judicial notice. Dr. Naila, do you have on your computer, say, can you read the preface on the judicial notice so that the people can, most of them are familiar with it anyway, but so they can build some questions around it, etc. Because remember, they have a lot of trolls that they have paid lately, and COINTELPRO operatives, including boasting, actually making videos where they boast about infiltrating all the Moorish movements to undermine them, and also finding operatives or cooperatives among them to create schism operations, etc. However, on the long term, the consciousness on the people is with the people is actually greater than their power to continue their schism operations. Can you read the preface on the judicial notice, please?
Starting from to all elected officials. So
yes.
Top. All right.
Read from the heading down.
Oh, all of the
judicial notice.
From judicial notice.
Yes.
Judicial notice and proclamation to all elected, all non-elected, and to all appointed United States Republic officials, public servants, and officers of trust, etc., doing business as of and for the federal, state, city, and municipal governments, including their personnel, their contractors, and their other associate corporate entities doing business at North America, and to all third-party interlopers or contractors, etc., concerning their fiduciary obligations, their official oaths, and their duties enumerated in the American Constitution, adopted for governance of the United States Republic, all binding treaties, the established law of the land, and all statutory and civil law codes of the land, etc. Know all men by these publications and precepts.
Now, yes. And then you can read the first three, stare decisis. Now, keep in mind that no man nor woman in government holds that office without an obligation or by oath to support and to defend the Constitution for the United States. And when they make that oath, keep in mind that their obligation is superseded by their obligations to the treaties that were set forth before the adoption of that Constitution. So when you look at their obligations, you look at all treaties in force, etc., to which they're obligated. And the more you do a little bit of research on your own, you can understand why criminals would not only not acknowledge and exercise their obligations to the treaties in force and to the Constitution, because they are in fact feudal operatives, and they are actually enemies of the state, pretending that the people of the land are enemies of the state. As a matter of fact, what they've done is flip places and tried and have been practicing slandering people who have been dealing with Constitution and treaty principles as if the people are out of order or criminal, when in fact they are out of order and criminal. And the things that you're experiencing today in the political forums, etc., whereas we've been telling the people in general about these things for last 40 years or so, is that we don't have to tell you anymore. And one of the things that I've had in conversations with people in these last month or so is that I don't want to get in the position of saying I told you so, but I told you so. But I don't have to tell you so, because now they're showing you themselves. And this is where we've been telling people for the last couple of years and emphasizing it in this last year, where all masks are off. So the circumstances of the political trade windows of the world and the credit windows of the world being frozen up is causing them to be openly hostile to people, etc. And in that process, they're actually exposing themselves. However, the other thing about the judicial notice that you need to know, and that I'm going to inform you of for those who may not really grasp where I'm going with this, is that those instruments were actually to inspire you to think for yourselves and to come to a state of mind of growth, expansion, and analysis that was needed for the time. However, in principle, while those principles are universal and why they have no what you would call chronological or time span closure, etc., for their established principles, etc., it is also to prepare the people to think in such manners as we are going to have to grow and expand into other dimensional levels of thinking, because the world is moving on. And so we're not looking necessarily, how do you say, to establish or reestablish things as they were, in the sense that it would appear. It is actually to give the people a clearer view of the breaches which have taken place, and also establish with the people their responsibilities to themselves and to their progeny, to take responsibility of self-government back, as these criminals are de facto on all levels. And while it's been uncomfortable for people to study and to start to work to get their houses in order, it is important for you to recognize that you're not going to have too much of a choice to survive politically and economically, and in some ways physically, if you don't start getting your house in order. So the judicial notice is essentially, on a metaphysical level as well as on a political level, firing the feudalists, also telling them that you know that they're feudalists, and also telling them that they have no right of power of attorney over you and your estate, and also that you're aware that you have right of your own estate, and also that your activities revolve around a reversion of estate, and that it is established law and not an option for them to critique or to counter, etc. And all counters made by them and all rebuttals made by them are actually acts of misprision, sedition, and treason. Know that for surety. Interjection, Doctor?
Not necessarily, but we do get a lot of calls from a lot of Moors who just exactly, which is probably what spurred this particular class.
Yes.
In response to so many Moors who call after having sent their paperwork to those 7 places, or sometimes even more, and they ask, did you receive it? They get back responses, no, well, we don't have it, or they get them, it comes back in the mail as returned to sender and so forth. Now, and they get up in arms, like,
yes, which means
somebody to help me.
That's not all right. So it's 2 things. Because this thing is bigger than, like, say, for instance, just like over the years, we have people at the House of Reawakening Minds. Over the years, we've had people come to the round tables, at my house and other places, come to New York, as we've done our classes in New York at the Moorish History School, civic class, etc. And then, of course, other venues. We've traveled around the country, at different colleges and different other venues, sharing with other people who are also active for the restoration of the estate, etc. And of course, in the process, you find, which is not an unknown factor, that almost every institution by program is infiltrated by operatives of the hybrid Europeans, which they boast of, if you get the point. However, what you recognize is that we have the unfortunate reality, whereas many people who become conscious don't really have years of background of studying both the anthropology, the epistemology, the cosmology, culture, jurisprudence as a rule, and which is also why the judicial notice is structured the way it's structured, because it's actually a teaching tool at the same time. Because in fact, in a rule of law, a notice doesn't even need to be that long. But knowing that many of the people have not had the what you would say, the conditions where they would be in a class where some people would be studying civics, like many of the Moorish Americans had not had civic instruction since, like, say, maybe the early 20s, when Noble Drew Ali set up the Moorish Temple of Science, which was a civic organization, etc. This is before the Moorish Science Temple of America in its, current iteration, political iteration. Then you all also know, for those of you who read the FBI papers, the infiltration problems that he's had since that time, since the mid-20s, etc. Then you had other organizations that had come about who were trying to establish or educational and erudition systems where the people could study constitutional enforcement principles, or what you call due process principles, and thus treaty principles that supersede that, because those principles of constitutional law actually come from fatwa or Moorish law in the first place, etc. And you find that the people are handicapped of not having the convenience of going to different classes. And many people have learned or heard about or had information shared with them either through internet or papers that people have shared with them. And so they don't have a background. And so, but also what it indicates also is a lack of study. And so many people get paperwork, and because they've been programmed, because remember, this is part of programming that they've operating, because they're used to the hybrid Europeans sticking them with needles and sticking them with military pills, you know, pharmaceutical military operations, and they operate from that mentality. All of our people have not shed that mentality yet, you know. And then you also have the problem where our people have been subjugated by the John D. Rockefeller, Frederick T. Gates mental warfare operations of the General Education Board, and have difficulty dealing with etymological cross-reference research and finding true meanings of words, etc. Therefore, not recognizing structures in contract law and, of course, treaty and constitution principles. And so this is why you often see people get the paperwork and then they'll start asking questions, and that's immediate indication that, you know, they don't have a civic background. But we also have the unfortunate conditions where having to try to get the people or bring the people to a certain level of consciousness, not having access to what you call educational and erudition institutions. And of course, as you already know, whenever we had any established institutions to really serve our people, that the hybrid Europeans would bomb them. As an example, what they did to MOVE, who had a structured education system for their own children, so they bombed them. What they did in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where our people had the largest and actually wealthiest bank on the land at that time, and they bombed them. So, you know, you have unum sanctum operations that are constantly going on, and because they're warring against us. The unfortunate thing that you find is that many of our people are not aware that they're warring against us. They look at them as having skin complexion issues when actually they've been warring against us, warring upon us, which is a major reason why they spent so many decades disarming the people so that the people would have no defense. Now, back to the issue of constitutional principle, that is the pre-existing obligations that exist with these people who have been pretending to be government. And of course, they've been breaching that because, in fact, they've been contrary or operating contrary to those rules because they are de facto. So it is incumbent upon the people, nevertheless, to make those proclamations to the world, so that these people in the platforms of fraud that they have created and imposed upon both us and upon the world, that they have no validity in the trade platforms of the world, etc. So they cannot continue to build bonds on them. This is another reason why they want the people to think that they're going to get a benefit from these bonding systems, if you get the point, because people are not aware that the bonds are against them and on their backs, and is actually the source of their economic miseries, etc. So that's another reason for the proclamations, and that's another reason why, for those who really understand that these people are de facto, why they don't want those papers in their files. Why? Because it's evidence that can be used in international high courts of human trafficking. So they don't want that evidence in their possession, even though they're obligated by law to treaties that supersede even their obligation to the Constitution for the United States, which is why they disparagingly knock both treaty and constitution principles, of which by principle of law they're obligated. However, it's on you, the people yourself to declare right, even if the hybrid aliens don't want to acknowledge it. They cannot say that you consented to your own subversion, to your own subjugation, to connotative slavery, which is what they're saying to the world. Because every time they get you, they trick you to sign things like census and voting in their platform. They're using that on the world platform, saying that you sanctioned them against your state. Because we got to remember that they're de facto. And you got to be clear that they are de facto. So when you participate in the de facto platforms that they create in the name of legitimate government, they use it actually against you. And then when you don't cooperate as they're causing injury on you, then they send out the first arm of the military octopus known as the Fraternal Order of the Police to destabilize the families, destabilize the communities, and severely attack anyone that deals with treaty enforcement and constitutional enforcement. And that is the misrepresentation and propaganda that you see going on these, what you call de facto attacks against any Moors or people of the land, not just here on the land at North America, but around the world, that stand on principles of treaties and constitution principles. Because in fact, they are operating absolutely opposite to that. Any other interjection, Dr. Nalia?
Well, you know, I'm deep into what I told you today, my latest read that I've had sitting on the shelf for over a year.
Oh yeah, about a year and a half actually.
About a year and a half. Yeah. And decided to pick this up and really kind of get into it. And in the which is, and some of the listeners have probably heard of this. And I don't think it's a banned book, but or is it kind of banned?
Put it this way. What you're seeing today, particularly on this land,
right?
Anything, any information that helps people will be attacked.
Wow.
Now, the issue, what you want to recognize is, and this is where our work has to come in, to aid in bringing the people to a certain level of cognizance and competence, whereas they can reasonably determine for themselves and not be in a follower mentality, but be cognizant and competent enough to recognize that they're being attacked by these people who they thought were legitimate government. Now, from the position of the hybrid Europeans, their political problem right now, which is how do you say, problematic with them right now, is trying to keep the people fooled in thinking that they're legitimate, and not figuring out that they're absolutely criminals, and that they've actually used people's taxes to actually hire private contractor, corporate entities, operatives to actually attack the people.
Right.
And this is what they don't know.
And see, but they have,
I
know one of my poems I wrote about their 1,000-year plan.
Yes.
So they have shorter term ones, but we can't plan for the next day, let alone for 1,000 years. But this book was written in 1998.
Yes.
And as I said, I credit Father Hannibal for turning me on to this book. I got it, and I'll be honest with you, because you see behind you.
We've been busy, and this ain't nothing. Look, they don't see these books or here, or in your room, or downstairs, or in the basement.
All the books there.
Yeah.
But this book called to me.
Yes.
And it's the book called Neotech. Some people
some people are familiar.
And in the very beginning of it, I'm talking about in the introductory
part
of it, they're talking about they're neo-techs and neo-cheaters.
Yes.
We want to be neo-techs. And this book, apparently, when I go through the 500 and some pages, I will be adept at a neo-tech. But this is what it says about neo-tech versus neo-cheaters.
Go ahead.
With neo-tech, a person can take away the power from those neo-cheaters who have drained that person for years or decades. That capturing of personal power through neo-tech is crucial for all major neo-cheaters. And this is what we're seeing today. And we've been seeing it. Yes. Today, extract money and power from the masses of unknowledgeable people. How? through the subtly camouflaged usurpation and destruction of values created, built, or earned by others. In fact, those value destroyers use neo-cheating without fear of being caught, without suspicion, and they are successful to the extent that they use neo-cheating. Consider how many of the most successful politicians have for years destructively regulated and harmfully controlled the value producers. You said it's us. It's the values in us.
It's called birthright theft.
They have neo-cheated the public for unearned personal power.
Yes.
Their power ploys have created jungles of destructive regulations and inefficiencies. They hassle busy individuals, cripple creative scientists, and prevent private enterprise from fully developing its productive and technological capacities. That arrogated authority not only diminishes everyone's spirit, but diminishes everyone's standard of living, and even prevents the development of cures for scourges such as heart disease, cancer, and AIDS. I'm gonna stop right there. But I'm just saying, in 1998, through 32 years ago, or 22 years ago, this man wrote this book, which is 500 and some pages, and that's just that's in the intro. But he may as well have written it today. As I've gone through this, he may as well has written it today, and it is my understanding that they did some, no pun intended, trumped up charges and
to get him out of the way.
Him after writing this book, which is liberation.
Exactly.
This is a liberating tool for anyone, and it's easy to read and easy to understand.
Exactly.
Turns the light bulb on, and how many of us could be in another place?
Yes.
Just by it, and it's not even stuff we don't know. It becomes stuff that you forgot.
And then look at this way. This is from a political perspective, right? That is another statement of simply telling you the operations of colonial operations. He's telling you what the parasiticism is.
He talks about